What if everything you learned about Iran was built on a story that was never fully true? Not the history books, not the maps, not the empires, the DNA. For decades, scientists thought they understood where Iranians came from. They had the Persians, they had the Aryans, they had Cyrus the Great and the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen. But then they started digging into the actual genome, into the bones, into the blood. And what they found, nobody expected. Not the historians, not the geneticists, not even the researchers who designed the experiments. Because beneath the story of Persia, beneath the empires and the invasions and the conquests, there was a deeper story, a biological story, one that had been quietly running for 10,000 years and waiting for science to finally catch up. Today, we are going to read that story, layer by layer, genome by genome, and I promise you, by the end of this video, the way you think about ancestry, your identity, and history will never be the same again. If you are fascinated by lost histories and ancient DNA mysteries, hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel exists for exactly this kind of story. And before we go any further, drop your country in the comments below. Where are you watching this from? And have you ever done a DNA ancestry test? What did it reveal about you? Let us know, because by the end of this video, your answer might surprise you more than you think. Now, let's go back. Way back. Not to Cyrus, not to the Persian Empire, much further. 10,000 years ago, in the highlands of western Iran, there was a valley. The Zagros Mountains rose around it like walls. The air was cold and thin, and a small group of people lived there in mud brick rooms, farming goats, grinding barley, and building a life that history would completely forget. We don't know what they called themselves. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't know what gods they prayed to. But in the 1960s, archaeologists found their home, a site called Ganj Dareh, which means treasure valley in Persian. And buried in the floor of a small room, they found her. A woman around 30 to 50 years old, in a grave with two other people beside her. For decades, she was just a skeleton in a storage room. Then, in 2016, scientists from Cambridge University, University College Dublin, that in South Korea's UNIST, extracted her DNA from her petrous bone, the densest bone in the human skull, the one that survives the longest, and sequenced her genome. What they found stopped everyone in their tracks. Researchers Gallego Llorente, Jones, Erickson, and their team, publishing in scientific reports, confirmed something extraordinary. This woman's DNA did not match the early farmers of Anatolia who built Europe. It did not match the Levantine farmers of the Middle East. It did not match anything in the known ancient Eurasian database. She was something separate, something isolated, something older in the sense of divergence, a population that had split off from the rest of the world's farming communities and gone its own way, quietly, in those mountains, for thousands of years. Think about what that means. At the very moment civilization was being invented, agriculture, animal farming, were permanent settlements. Three completely different groups of people were doing it independently, in parallel, without knowing about each other. The Anatolians in Turkey, the Levantines in modern Israel and Jordan, and her people, the Zagros farmers of Iran, three separate human experiments, running at the same time, never talking to each other, never mixing their blood. And here is the part that will stay with you. Her community at Ganj Dareh holds the earliest confirmed evidence of goat domestication on Earth. Her people were the first humans in history to look at a wild animal and decide, we can tame this. We can build a life around this. The agricultural revolution that eventually fed all of humanity. It may have had one of its earliest roots right here, in this forgotten valley, with these forgotten people. She gave the world its food system, and history never even gave her a name. But here is what makes this even more remarkable. Her DNA, this 10,000-year-old genome, didn't disappear. It survived. It passed down through generations, through thousands of years, through every empire that rose and fell over that land. Scientists found her genetic signal alive in modern Iranians today. She is still there, in the blood of people living right now, 10 millennia later. But her descendants didn't stay isolated forever, because something was coming. Something fast and powerful and completely unstoppable, and it was coming from the north. Around 2000 BCE, roughly 4,000 years ago, the world changed. Out on the vast grasslands north of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, there lived a people we now call the Yamnaya, Bronze Age pastoralists, herders, riders, warriors. Genetically, they were built from a mixture of Eastern European hunter-gatherers and ancient Caucasus ancestry, and they started moving. While most people know that the Yamnaya swept into Europe, genetic studies, including the landmark 2015 paper by Hock and colleagues published in Nature, showed that up to 75% of the ancestry of Bronze Age Europeans traces back to this steppe migration. They brought horses. They brought wheels. They brought a language that would eventually become almost every language spoken in Europe today. But here is what almost nobody teaches. They also went south, into Iran. Researchers analyzing Y chromosome data from modern Iranians, including a study published in PLOS 1 in 2012, found haplogroup R1A, the genetic fingerprint of the Yamnaya steppe populations, distributed across multiple Iranian ethnic groups, Kurds, Persians, Mazandaranis, all carrying a piece of that Bronze Age steppe wave in their Y chromosomes. This wasn't a peaceful migration. Settlement patterns from that era, weapon burials, skeletal trauma evidence, sudden population shifts, all point to something violent, a confrontation between the new arrivals and the people already there. And now here is the twist that nobody in mainstream history will say out loud. The people we celebrate as the builders of the Persian Empire, the forebears of Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, may themselves be the descendants of invaders who replaced an earlier civilization. The great Persian kings, warriors, conquerors, who may have had conquerors in their own ancestry. But the Zagros woman's people were not erased. A 2025 study, the results of which were presented in February of that year, confirmed over 3,000 years of genetic continuity in northern Iranian highland populations. The ancient genome held on. It went underground, but it survived. And it wasn't the only thing arriving in Iran from the outside, because while the steppe warriors came from the north, something completely different was traveling along the most famous road in human history, and it was coming from the east. For over 1,000 years, the Silk Road connected China to the Mediterranean. Merchants, ideas, religions, diseases, all of it moved along those routes. But no one thought about what else was moving along them. Until geneticists looked. A 2019 genome study covered by Eurocalert from the Basque Country Research Network confirmed measurable East Asian and Central Asian genetic components in specific Iranian populations, particularly in eastern Iran. The signal traces back to Silk Road-era Sogdian merchants, Turkic pastoralists, and later Mongol-era movement. Now, stop and think about that. The Mongols invaded Iran in 1258 CE. They destroyed cities. They burned libraries. They killed millions. Iranian historians call it one of the darkest chapters in their entire civilization. And yet, the Mongol genetic signal is still detectable in living Iranians today. The people your history books call destroyers, they became part of the Iranian genome. They are inside the descendants of the civilization they supposedly destroyed. This is what DNA does that history cannot. It doesn't take sides. It just records what happened. And the genetic record of the Hazara and Baloch communities of eastern Iran, communities that have historically faced discrimination within Iran for being too foreign, too Central Asian, shows that they carry a layer of Iranian and Central Asian genetic history that no other group preserves. The people called outsiders were carrying history that insiders had lost. But the East came from the East, and the North came from the North. So the strangest signal of all came from somewhere no Iranian history book ever looks. It came from across the water, from the south. In the southernmost part of Iran, along the coast of Hormozgan province, on the shores of the Persian Gulf, there live a people called the Bandari. They are Iranian citizens. They speak Persian and Arabic dialects. They have lived on that coast for centuries. But something about their DNA confused scientists. A 2011 study published in the Journal of Human Genetics examining mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome variation across Iran found a sub-Saharan African-related genetic signal in these southern coastal populations. Not a small signal, a real, measurable, ancient one. And it wasn't from the Arab slave trade, which is what most people assume when they hear African ancestry in the Gulf region. This signal was older, much older. It pointed to prehistoric maritime exchange, ancient seafaring across the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean, long before recorded history, when people on both sides of the water were crossing it and leaving pieces of themselves on the other shore. Supporting this, a landmark 2023 study published in Nature, led by researchers from Harvard, revealed that Persian Gulf merchants were genetically embedded in the medieval Swahili coast of East Africa. The Indian Ocean wasn't a barrier. It was a highway, a two-way genetic highway, and Iran was at one end of it. Now look at the Bandari people today. Their music, especially the healing ceremonies called Zar rituals, carries rhythms and structures that directly echo sub-Saharan East African traditions. Scholars of ethnomusicology have noted this for decades, and now genetics confirms that the cultural echo has a biological root. These are not borrowed traditions. These are inherited ones. And here is the injustice in this story. For generations, Bandari people were looked at as foreign within their own country. Too dark, too different, too African. Yet their genetic data shows they may represent some of the oldest continuous coastal populations on the Iranian plateau. The people called foreign were the most ancient ones of all. But Iran's south remembered Africa. Its east carried the Silk Road. Its north held the steppe warriors. And in Iran's northwest, something was quietly doing something no scientist thought was possible. It was preserving an entire civilization in its blood. There is a small religious community in Iran called the Zoroastrians. They follow one of the oldest religions in the world, a faith that was born in Iran during the second millennium BCE, centuries before Islam, centuries before Christianity was established in the region. Today, they number only a few thousand in Iran itself, quietly living, quietly practicing, and almost invisible to the outside world. But when scientists sequenced their DNA, something extraordinary emerged. A 2017 study published in the American Journal of Human Genetics, led by Sayoa Lopez, Mark Thomas, Lucy Van Dorp, and Garrett Hellenthal at University College London, revealed that Iranian Zoroastrians show increased genetic homogeneity compared to every other Iranian population tested. In plain language, they had been marrying within their own community for a very, very long time. The study used advanced haplotype analysis and found that the last significant genetic mixing in the ancestors of Iranian Zoroastrians dated to somewhere between 570 BCE and 746 CE, older than the admixture date of any other Iranian group tested. In other words, their genome stopped taking in outside DNA right around the time the Achaemenid Persian Empire was at its height, around the time of Cyrus the Great, around the time of Darius, around the time of Xerxes. They froze themselves in time, genetically. Every generation that married within the faith, not out of hatred of others, but out of preservation of themselves, was unknowingly keeping ancient Iran alive in their cells. And the proof extends beyond Iran's borders. When the Islamic conquest arrived in the 7th century CE, many Zoroastrians fled. They sailed to the western coast of India. They settled in Gujarat. They became the Parsis, the Persian people. And they have lived in India ever since, maintaining their identity, their fire temples, their sacred traditions. The UCL study found that Parsis carry almost the same genetic signature as Iranian Zoroastrians. The migration story their oral tradition had always told, confirmed, validated, written in the genome. Think about what that means. Two communities separated by an ocean for over 1,000 years, one in Mumbai, one in Tehran, and their DNA still telling the same story. When they didn't just preserve a religion, they preserved a genome, a biological letter written 2,500 years ago, still being read today. But here's the question that nobody asks next. If Zoroastrians preserved the old Iran in their blood, what did 1,400 years of Islamic civilization actually do to everyone else? The answer will surprise you. In 651 CE, the last Sassanid emperor was killed, and the Arab-Islamic conquest of Iran was complete. A new language poured in, a new religion, new architecture, new poetry, new law, new science, new everything. For 1,400 years, Iran has been one of the great centers of Islamic civilization. Persian and Arabic became so deeply intertwined that Persian itself absorbed thousands of Arabic words. The Iranian cultural golden age, its philosophers, its astronomers, its poets, all built their legacy inside an Arab-Islamic framework. You would assume that means a lot of Arab DNA entered the Iranian population. You would be wrong. So an HLA, Class II genetic diversity study conducted at Shiraz University of Medical Sciences, published in the Iranian Journal of Immunology, used a MOVA analysis to compare the genetic distances between Iranian populations and populations across the broader Middle East. The findings were stark. Iranian Arabs, the Arabic-speaking communities of southwest Iran, are genetically more similar to other Iranians than to Arabs from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, or the Arabian Peninsula. That meaning the Arabic-speaking Iranians are largely Iranians who adopted the language, not Arab immigrants who moved in. And at the broader genome level, multiple studies confirm that the Arab genetic contribution to the overall Iranian gene pool is small, measurable, but small. Iran speaks Arabic-infused Persian. Iran practices a religion born in Arabia. Iran built its medieval golden age on Arab-Persian intellectual exchange. But its genome, its actual biological inheritance, remained almost entirely pre-Islamic. Culture is a costume. You can take it off and put on a new one. DNA is a skeleton. It doesn't change because a new empire arrived. And nowhere in Iran did the skeleton hold more firmly than in the mountains. Deep in the Zagros Range, in the highlands of western Iran, there are communities that live the way their ancestors lived 4,000 years ago. The Lur, the Bakhtiari, says the Mazandarani of the Zagros Mountains in the north. Every spring, Bakhtiari families pack everything they own onto the backs of horses and mules and walk, across mountain passes covered in snow, down into green valleys, then back again in autumn. The same routes, the same mountains, the same rhythm of life their great-great-great-grandparents walked, and their DNA walks with them. A 2025 study, a collaboration between the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, Harvard's Reich lab, and the University of Tehran, analyzed ancient Iranian samples spanning from the Copper Age through the Sassanid era. The results confirmed that highland Iranian populations show the strongest genetic continuity with Bronze Age Iranian samples of any group in Western Asia. Scientists have a term for this, a genetic refugium, a place so geographically protected by mountains, by deserts, by sheer inaccessibility, that invasions couldn't reach the bloodlines. Where the ancient genome just kept going, generation after generation, untouched. The people who call these communities rural, backward, old-fashioned, are looking at the most direct living link to the builders of the first Iranian civilizations. The very people who carry the least mixed genome are the ones carrying the deepest Iranian history. But here is where the story takes its most unexpected turn. Because the most shocking discovery in Iranian genetics wasn't about the Bakhtiari in the mountains. It wasn't about the Bandari on the coast. It wasn't even about the Zoroastrians in their fire temples. It was found when a scientist decided to compare the Iranian genome to a population that Iranians are told to consider their enemy. Multiple population genomic studies, cross-referencing ancient Zagros Neolithic ancestry data with modern population genetics, might have found something that stops you cold when you see it. Modern Iranians and Ashkenazi Jews share a significant, specific ancient ancestry component. Both populations trace part of their genetic inheritance to the same source, the Zagros Neolithic farming population, the same people as the woman in the Ganj Dare grave. This is not recent mixing. This is not medieval exchange. This is not the result of Persian and Jewish communities living near each other for centuries, though they did. This shared lineage is old, 10,000 years old, from before Persia, before Israel, before any of these names existed, before written language, before history itself was invented. These are two populations connected by a genetic thread that goes back further than any religion, any border, any conflict ever could. And now the history hits different. In 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great marched into Babylon and freed the Jewish people from captivity. It is recorded in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 45. Cyrus is the only non-Jewish figure in the entire Hebrew Bible to be called the Anointed One, the Messiah, by the Jewish prophets. The Cyrus cylinder, the clay tablet he issued, now sitting in the British Museum in London, is considered the world's first declaration of human rights. It freed enslaved people. It allowed exiled communities to return home. And why would a Persian king show that kind of respect and care for a Jewish population? History gives political answers. DNA gives a different one. The king who freed them and the people he freed were, at a genetic level, distant cousins, sharing ancestry from a world that had existed and gone silent 6,000 years before either of their civilizations was born. They did not know this. They could not have known this, but the genome knew. In a modern world where Iran and Israel are locked in one of the most dangerous geopolitical conflicts on the planet, where missiles are exchanged, where leaders speak of each other's destruction, the DNA of their populations is quietly telling a 10,000-year-old story of shared origin. Ancient DNA has a way of making enemies into cousins. The question is what you do with that information. But here is where Iran's genetic story leaves everyone, including the scientists, without an answer. Because after all of this, the Zagros farmers, the steppe warriors, the Silk Road migrants, the African maritime connections, the Zoroastrian time capsule, the conquest that couldn't conquer the genome, there is still a portion of the Iranian genetic profile that doesn't match anything. A 2021 study by Fernandez and colleagues, published through Molecular Biology and Evolution, specifically examined ancient ancestry patterns in modern Iranians and Arabians, and they found it clearly. A component the researchers called deep Iranian ancestry, or basal Eurasian ancestry, a genetic signal so old and so isolated that it doesn't match any sequenced ancient population in the database. No grave has been found. No site has been excavated that explains it. No human remains have been unearthed that carry it in its original, unmixed form. Yet it exists only as a shadow in the genome of living people. And here is the theory that keeps scientists up at night. Around 20,000 years ago, during the last ice age, sea levels were much lower than today. The Persian Gulf, that body of water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, was not a sea at all. It was dry land, a fertile basin, fed by the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Karun, and other rivers. Possibly one of the most habitable pieces of land on Earth at the time. Scientists have theorized that the basal Eurasian population, the source of this deep, unmatched signal, may have lived in that basin. A civilization that never built monuments on land we can reach today, because their land is now under 100 meters of salt water. If this theory is correct, then the Iranian plateau doesn't just sit at a crossroads of ancient civilizations. It sits at the edge of the genetic ground zero of modern humanity's expansion into all of Eurasia. Every non-African person alive today carries some trace of what those people carried. And the clearest echo of them, the least diluted signal, may survive in Iran, an entire civilization, swallowed by the sea, leaving only a thread of code in the bloodstream of the living. No name, no language, no monuments, no stories, just the genome, still running, still being carried forward by people who will never know whose ancient breath they are continuing. See, and right now, as you are watching this, there is an excavation underway on the eastern Iranian plateau, results not yet published. Researchers who have said quietly in academic circles that what they are finding may require a fundamental rewrite of when and how modern humans first spread across Asia. When those results drop, this channel will be the first to cover it, so make sure you are subscribed and leave this video on for someone who needs to hear this story. Because this is not just Iran's history, this is yours.